I'm Justin Moss from Florida Grand Opera, and we've assembled together the key players in the project we have come to call Stars and Distances, also the name of the composition of composer Fredrick Kaufman, whose project we have recorded and had a pretty exciting time of it too. We actually have the maestro here who made the project come to fruition, if you will, and other participants who we'll talk to in just a minute about how this whole thing became a really precedent-setting cooperative endeavor by some of the key and leading cultural institutions here in South Florida. First of all, Fredrick Kaufman, I'd like to ask you about the genesis of this piece, Stars and Distances. I think if I were to pick up a CD out of the bin that was labeled so, I would start thinking perhaps of Gustav Holst.
Heavens no. It's a good thing to be related to, but the work actually came about in England, and I was composer in residence at the University of London, King's College. And England being England, it rained. London rained all the time. The weather was god awful. The soles of my shoes fell off that year, I'll never forget it, from all of the rain. And we had a spell of good weather. And I decided to take a walk, and I took a walk to Hyde Park. And it was clear, it was beautiful, and I lay down on the grass and I looked up at the sky, and I saw the brightest, most exciting sky I had ever seen. And I laid there for a couple of hours and just looked and looked. And as I looked, I started to realize that certain stars were brighter than others. Well, the next morning, I went back to the university. I went to the astronomy department. I said, I'd like your help. I'm thinking about writing a work about some stars, but I don't know which stars they are and where they are, etc. And so the dean at the time said, Fred, why don't I give you a graduate fellow, to go back with you tonight or next time it's clear. I'll give you a telescope and some charts, and maybe he could help you out. So 2 days later, we went back out there. It was another clear night. And again, I laid up and said, that one, and that one, and that one. And he found what turned out to be the genesis of this piece, 15 stars that I identified. I then came back to the United States and started to research those stars, the light years from our sun, our planet, and what the physical makeup of them was. And I was really amazed to find out that most of them, all of them, were brighter than our sun. And they weren't all just a round circle. Some of them had a tail. Some of them were a series of cluster stars put together, but out here they looked like one. And from that point on, I realized, well, I think I'd like to write a composition about these 15 stars. What would they sound like? We know if we go into outer space, it's dead silent. There's no sound out there. And so the result of all of the things I discovered when looking at it and the placement in a specific format dictated what I was going to do. I knew that, to me, the purest sound is the human voice. I know that will make you happy to hear.
Thank you.
And so therefore, I wanted to write a piece for 16 voices, because that gave me the best balance between sopranos and basses, 4 in each one. And the form of the work was dictated by where I placed the pieces. And then, since there was anything really written like it, including Gustav Holst, who took a totally different approach, I had to then come up with the sounds and how to structure. And that was the basic premise behind the entire work.
I think it's profound and completely amazing, and there are a few things as humbling as starting to contemplate those vast distances and the red shifts and whatnot, the techniques that cosmologists have developed to measure those unspeakable distances. I think Robert Frost says, when he goes to consider those issues, he realizes he needs to pull away because he has his own scary spaces to worry about and he can't even begin to go there and contend with it. But a phenomenally inventive and novel concept for a piece of music, and then the challenge of how do I make this music? All of these concepts. I love it. The next person who comes into the picture, maybe not the very next person, but we'll segue to her first, and then we'll come back to maybe who the next guy was, is Susan Danis. Susan T. Danis is the general director of Florida Grand Opera, and she was approached by Maestro Andrew Bizantz, who has in fact a long relationship with the company, just having conducted our last production of Minotti's The Consul, successfully too. And he approached Susan and had sort of an idea. Susan, tell us how you fit in and how you think, in some ways, Florida Grand Opera fit into this.
Well, it's interesting because Andrew and I started with one discussion, and I got so excited about the piece as I learned about the genesis of the piece, started to look at it, to look at this brilliant proposal that Andrew had drawn up to inform people about it, that where it started out that I was more going to be in a, let's say, assisting capacity, actually started to look at the opportunity for us to be involved, truly involved, to work with our young artist and some of the other singers in the community. So I can say that I kind of went from Andrew seeking a little bit of guidance and just asking for some help to being so impacted by the piece and by Andrew's enthusiasm, which is always omnipresent, that it kind of just pulled me right in, and I wanted to get on board and do everything I could to make sure that the piece was performed, recorded, and moving on to bigger and better things, so to speak.
Well, let's just segue into those bigger and better things for a moment. I think this would be a good time to do that, actually. The impetus behind approaching the opera to participate in making a recording was to provide something for the new Frost Science Museum, under construction now in Miami on the iconic site of Museum Park across from the new Perez Art Museum. And I think, Viv, it would be good for you to talk to us a little bit about you people being approached with the idea of having available to you a recording of a piece of music by a local composer named Stars and Distances.
It's a great story. In my case, much more serendipitous than these other stories. Andrew, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, had a friend, Joe Falk, who, as Joe calls himself, is the longest-suffering board member of the Patricia and Philip Frost Museum of Science. And he said that he'd been approached by Andrew to look at a piece, and that Fred had been interested in perhaps donating it and having it be the music that would be associated with our incredible new planetarium. So we all got quite excited about that, and as Susan points out, Andrew put together a very nice piece sort of explaining both the background, the genesis, his qualities, Fredrick's qualities. So we looked it over and thought, well, this would be really cool, this would be interesting. So we got him, and Jillian Thomas, our CEO, so looked at me and she said, well, it's about science, so you're our scientist, so you take this over. So I did, and we've become fast and firm friends as a result of all of this, and it's a wonderful opportunity. And I think you put it very well. I mean, I think the fact that Miami's going to have this spectacular new Frost Science Museum, state-of-the-art, state-of-science planetarium, and to have a composer, of Fred's qualities and of what he's produced in the past, doing something called Stars and Distances, and to think about associating that with the planetarium is just a spectacular opportunity. And of course, Andrew's been there shepherding it from the beginning at every step. And it's just been for me as a relative newcomer to Miami, it's just been a wonderful opportunity to get to know both the music scene in Miami, but also now all four of you.
Exciting. However, you came to have confidence that Andrew Bizantz was the right person to bring this project to fruition.
I was at the School of Music at Florida International University, its founder and its director for 10 years. And we just started the orchestra program with Carlos Piantini is the first director of the orchestra, and Carlos did it for around 4 or 5 years, and then in came Stuart Robinson, who of course was the principal conductor of the Florida Grand Opera, and I approached Stuart about coming here to conduct our orchestra, and Stuart said, fine, but I can't be there all the time, and I have a marvelous person who could step in when I can't be there, and I know you'll be happy. Well, I wasn't only happy, I was overjoyed. And after I met Andrew and I watched him work, and it was apparent to me that when the opportunity came, I was going to do something. And it was Andrew who, after a friendship that ensued, Andrew looked on my webpage and said, Fred, what is this Stars and Distances about? And I told him the story, and he said, can I see the score? I showed him the score, and he said, I want to do this. And there it is. It was one of the happier decisions I ever made, because he's a brilliant conductor and really understands what I was conceiving of as I wrote this piece.
Thanks. That's really good to hear. We think he's a brilliant conductor as well. And I would like now to ask the maestro himself about your participation, your steps down the road of this process, if you will. First of all, approaching the Frost Museum of Science, approaching Florida Grand Opera, and what the challenges you had in moving forward with the piece and the preparation for it as well. First, let's talk about your approaching the two participants.
And when Fred and I started talking about this piece and why we should do it, it's an important, very important piece in Fred's catalog that did not have a professional recording, and it deserved it. It's a terrific work on just standing on its own. But nowadays it's very difficult to just do anything for one's own benefit or vanity. And I thought, well, this recording could serve another purpose. And years ago, I worked for the Buffalo Philharmonic, and one of the ways that the Buffalo Philharmonic started recording again was to partner with the Albright Knox Art Museum, which is one of the major institutions in the city. They basically did a CD of French Impressionist music to accompany a French Impressionist show at the museum. And that had been stirring around for a while, and I then said to Fred, I think with this new edifice going up downtown, we have the perfect opportunity to, find a permanent home for this piece of music that will have wide exposure, but also will really be a complement to what is happening at the Science Museum. And growing up, we were talking about this a little while ago, Biff and I, about Jack Horkheimer and the importance of the Miami Space Transit Museum. It's just an absolute local fixture, and what a great thing to have other local organizations involved in this important aspect of the new Philip and Patricia Frost Museum. I actually went to Susan first. She's somebody I've admired since we became friends 2 years ago, just for the way her brain works and the way she can look at a project and see what the potential is. So I took her the proposal and said, Susan, I just really want to practice my pitch and to say, this is something we're interested in. And boy, she came back with a whole bigger proposal than I ever imagined, which was to involve FGO directly, which frankly is the best of all possible worlds, because had we recorded the vocals anywhere else, it wouldn't have the connection that having Florida Grand Opera connecting with the Science Museum, it wouldn't have the importance that represents. And so to me, that was a real thrill. What was also interesting in sort of acting as a producer and pusher of the piece was at some point I had to step back and say, I have to conduct this thing. This is a very complex piece of music. And I've known other works of Fred's, and I think as a composer, he's got a language that is very complicated, very sophisticated, but at the same time, very accessible to the listener. And one of my goals in rehearsing this piece, in discovering it for myself as a musician, was to make sure that all of the incredible detail that is in this score, the score is about 500, 600 bars long.
God, is it that long?
Yeah, it's about 17 minutes worth of music, and each of the stars has its own individual character. But if you only focus on that, then all you get is 15 sections of music, as opposed to the sense of an arc, of a narrative arc.
Continuum.
Yeah, exactly so. And in some ways, Fred is very modern, but he's also very traditional in that the piece has a definite, to me, three-part structure, and feels very much like we have the first section, the second section, which is kind of a development, and then the third section, which is the climactic material, and then ending with a coda that is reflective of the very beginning of the work. To find the pacing for all of that, to make sure that, again, not only do we hear the distinct characteristics of each of the 15 stars, but we also have a sense of the piece, where it moves, where it pulls back. And, you know, not having any frame of reference, as the piece had never really been recorded before and hadn't been performed in a while.
Well, anything was ever done like it before. So
exactly.
it was
You
a
have to
challenge.
kind of, you know, we work together very closely. And then Fred has a lot of extended compositional technique in his music, where there will be sections that are sort of free form and flowing and don't relate to the meter of the bar. Translating that to the FGO Young Artists and the other wonderful singers that we had, you know, was a big part of the process. You have to work on both an intellectual level and then also a musical level to create the effects that he intended.
I think one of the fun things about that, as you think through it as well, and you imagine the planetarium, and you imagine these kids coming to the planetarium, because there are these 15 stars that they'll be able to identify in the sphere of the planetarium, they start to connect the science of the stars to the music. And I can imagine them going and listening to the music and picking out their favorite star and trying to follow it through the music, which I think is going to be remarkable.
I do too. Tell us about the performing requirements, like how big an orchestra, how many voices?
Well, it's actually, in its way, very, very bare. It's very bare. Everything is very exposed. It's 16 voices, as Fred described, 4 sopranos, 4 altos, 4 tenors, and 4 basses.
But that's as close as I get to a chorus.
Right. It really, at some points, it is an ensemble. At some points, though, it's very distinct and individual, and everybody has specific roles. We always joke during the course of rehearsal that it is written from an instrumentalist perspective for voices. Singers sometimes count a little differently than people who have sat in a clarinet section for 30 years of their career. And a lot of Fred's rhythmic impetus requires you accessing a different part of your brain than what we're used to in Puccini. But as a conductor, it's always my job to kind of rein in. And so that was one of the big challenges, was to get everybody to sort of count the same way, to hear the pulse the same way, because some of these very interesting and intricate rhythmic subdivisions require you to be an individual, not part of an ensemble. Because even though everybody's singing at the same time, they all have a different responsibility at that moment, and it makes it a challenge, but at the same time gives the piece the texture that it has.
Which reminds me of one of the very first rehearsal that Andrew had with the Florida Grand Opera singers. And by the way, they're spectacular singers. He said, Fred, would just tell them a little bit about the work. I said, well, I'm not going to give you the whole history like I just gave here of the work. I said, but let me tell you this. If you find yourself singing exactly what the person next to you is singing, you're wrong.
That's good. So a starkness like outer space itself, with vast distances between one object and another, you know, certainly. I'm interested, though, in the process of teaching this piece of music to people for whom it was a totally new experience. My office is not far from a side of many of the rehearsals, and I would listen to this rehearsal process thinking, how will these guys ever learn this piece of music? But as they began to and gain in confidence and sing it, it was breathtaking, and I was totally thrilled. Did everyone come like off the book and totally ready to go?
Well, to some degree, and I've got to give credit to 3, because one's out here at FIU, but 2 really unsung heroes of this project from Florida Grand Opera, and those are the young artist pianists Tess and Maria, who worked individually
Tess
with
Hartle and Maria Paulina Garcia.
Yes, exactly. And they took the young artists individually, then in groups, through the piece, so they were well prepared before we even had our first rehearsal as a total ensemble. And out here at FIU, several future young artists who are coming in next season were also part of the project, and Bob Dundas, who is currently the dean of the school, who is also one of the voices on the recording, they all work together to really pull the piece apart. You know, you have to, again, think with two brains. One is a vocalist and what you have to do to produce the sounds that Fred's asking for, but then also you have to think very rhythmically. And so we benefited once we got to rehearsal by the fact that everybody at FGO had done so much prep work that the people from FIU had, and the other musicians we used from within Miami, somebody like Amanda Kreider, who is a former FGO young artist. She's a brilliant musician, and she's exactly the kind of person that you want on a project like this, that understands it from an intellectual perspective, but also then knows how to deliver it.
You can really anchor it.
Solid. Exactly. So, but let me just also say then too, as a credit to those 16 singers, you know, you if they're not even close to being able to understand this, you're never going to get anywhere with it. And they were so willing and so invested in it that by the time we got to the recording session here,
they were into it.
Wonderful Wertheim Hall, they were into it. And the producer said he had never heard somebody or a group as well rehearsed coming into the recording session as this, and it made his life a lot easier.
That's wonderful. Susan, did you hear feedback from the artists about their participation in the project?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it went from, oh my goodness, when they're first started. Because to say that Fredrick's writing is challenging is an understatement for a singer. I saw a lot of white faces. But as Andrew said so kindly, I do think that Tessa and Maria's initial work with them helped a great deal. It was a really significant part of the schedule that they were prepared to then work with Andrew, and then they all really enjoyed
rehearsals.
Absolutely.
Oh, they were.
And enjoyed working with the maestro. And I think to kind of know that you're part of something. Now many of our young artists have moved on, and when we hopefully have a live performance at the opening of the museum, which is going to
start
be
the process all over again.
yeah, it'll be a new group. But honestly, this group of young artists who's been hired for the coming year, it's already on their repertoire sheet for what they need to learn. And I think for it to even affect two of our classes of young artists is fantastic. And as I got lost in saying that they really enjoyed getting a chance to work with Maestro Brezance and really take it all the way through the rehearsal process. And as a young artist, how often do you get to be part of a recording? What an amazing thing to walk away with as a young artist, that we could offer them as a community. That kind of opportunity is really unique and really a wonderful thing.
And also, just to say, the rarity of having the composer right in the room.
Exactly.
So we would be rehearsing around, and then somebody would ask the question. I said, "Fred, what are we doing?"
Fredrick. Fredrick. Absolutely.
Sorry,
it's terrific
too
to
colloquial.
Have, the definitive word right there at your side.
Sure. Sure.
Most of the composers whose music we rehearse are long gone. And we're free to pretty much do as we want, but it's good to have the discipline of the composer right at your side as you work it through. Biff, let's bounce back to you for just a second. And we've been talking about this exciting project, ostensibly the purpose to provide something in the new planetarium, which is maybe the most striking architectural feature of the new Science Museum as you see it from going over the MacArthur Causeway. Wow, this wonderful, magnificent dome.
Spectacular white glow.
Tell us a little bit about the planetarium. I think that'd be helpful for us to just have a feel for what we're in for when we go to hear Stars and Distances.
Sure. So the planetarium, as you so brilliantly stated, is architecturally spectacular. It is one of the four components of the Frost Science Museum, and you do see it from the Art Center. You see it from MacArthur, and it'll come to life at night. So one of the things to think about is how we actually bring Fredrick's music out into the world at night with that projected globe in the background. So we always think about planetaria from the inside. And of course, we'll celebrate the music inside, we'll celebrate the experience inside, but really thinking about everybody getting to see it from the outside and hearing it at the same time, I think would be splendid, because again, you can bring attention to each of the stars and each of the voices from the outside. But obviously the planetarium during the day, when it's dark inside, will be a wonderful place to hear the music as well. And the planetarium itself is what we call a full dome planetarium, which means that when you're in the cosmos, you will feel that great distance that you talked about. You'll feel the distance between the stars because it's fully immersed. So it's stadium seating. It's about 21 degrees, so about the same as the Earth's angle. And so you get in there, and the image disappears under your feet and over your head and on either side. And so you're deep in the middle of the cosmos. And then on top of that, we've got 8K resolution. So if you're lucky, and I don't even own a television, so I'm definitely unlucky, but if you're lucky, you might own one of these new 4K high definition televisions. This is twice that definition. So again, when you're in that cosmos, you're going to feel deeply there. And we're going to be able to take you to Rigel, for example, and at the same time you'll hear the voice in the background. So I think it's just one of these wonderful opportunities to match science and art, in this case music, in ways that will blow people away.
A terrific opportunity, and I think something for all of us who are in the cultural community here in South Florida to be really proud of, and maybe a model of inspiration for us to pursue even further into the future.
I can imagine actually closing down 395 MacArthur the night that it opens, so you have that pulled down behind you.
Yeah.
Florida Grand Opera out there, the voices, spotlights down. Fred in his black.
I'm all for it.
I may fool you and wear something white.
It's a great, great moment. Had you ever, Fredrick, envisioned that this piece of music that you composed how long ago?
Oh, it's around 20 years ago.
Okay, might have such an afterlife and such an exciting place on the shelf, if you will.
No. You know, you write a composition like this and you hope that it will be performed by wonderful musicians and that as many people as possible will hear it. Of course, this is a joy. This is a joy. Florida Grand Opera is a great company. Great company. Andrew's a brilliant conductor, and we're in one of the finest museums in the world. I mean, what else can a composer ask for?
Well, it's been sort of a lucky day for
You know,
all of
if
us.
you don't mind, I would just like to mention two other people who were involved in the opera. Not only do we have the vocal sounds being sung, but I used spoken parts of people reading scientific data in the background. Not prominently so, but you'll hear it emerge now and then. One of them is an old colleague of mine, a dear friend, Karen Fuller, we pulled her in the last second and said, Karen, could you do this? Brought her over WLRN, and she knocked our socks off. And then we turned to someone else, John Fleming, a wonderful actor, has a great career on the stage, on television, in the movies, and he was a neighbor of mine. And one day I heard this voice and I said, how would you like to do a piece for me? And John came aboard, and so we don't only have 16 wonderful singers, but we have those two voices being woven in and out throughout the work, and I'm thrilled to death. And I would like to take this opportunity, if I may, to say thank you, Andrew, thank you, Sylvan, and thank you, Biff. This has been a joy for me.
I think it sounds like a terrific project, and I can't wait to have an opportunity to buy a copy of the CD at the new Frost Science Museum.
We'll have one on reserve. Maybe we'll have more than one.
Big stack of them.
Yeah.
This has been a terrific discussion of Stars and Distances, both the project and the composition by composer Fredrick Kaufman, and I'd like to thank the participating organizations in realizing Stars and Distances, Frost Science, Florida Grand Opera, and the Wortham Performing Arts Center at Florida International University. It's been great, and can't wait to hear it.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was excellent.